Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're having a great season. So far, so good on this end. Flick is meeting or exceeding expectations. I hope your dog or dogs are doing the same and you're getting out, shooting straight, having some incredible camaraderie with friends and family, and seeing some beautiful places. At least that's why I go. I think it's why you go too. Well, Randy Schultz is going to help us with that. He's got a lot to talk about. You know him as a blogger, an author, etc., etc. More on that in a moment. Some of the other great things we'll be doing, we'll take a look at a public access spot in Arizona, of all places. Some hunting strategy and dog handling tips. And, of course, the Upland Nation quiz and a prize for somebody out there. It's all coming up this week on the Upland Nation podcast. In the meanwhile, though, let's just take a quick break and talk about two of our incredible sponsors. The first, Sage and Breaker Mercantile, sageandbreaker.com. Learn more about their gun cleaning and gun care gear. Some incredible how-to videos. If you think you know a thing or two about cleaning and caring for your guns, watch the videos. I can almost guarantee you're going to learn something at sageandbreaker.com. Sign up for their emails because that's how you'll get in on all the new products before all the rest of us schmoes do. It's all at sageandbreaker.com. And then my good friend Jack Homa at espamerica.com. Remember, hearing loss is cumulative. Custom fitting keeps those hearing protection devices in your ears even on an active hunt. I'll be talking more about that in a moment as well. In the meanwhile, here's a guy that we met, well, way back. I was at a Cabela store in Idaho, and Randy came in. He knew I was going to be in the area. He's from way far away from Idaho, but we got to talking and have been corresponding ever since over all sorts of things. Randy Schultz is the author of the book, Endless October. He's also a blogger. It's called birdhuntersthoughts.com. And then his podcast, Turn 'em Loose. I've been a guest on that, and now he's returning the favor here. So let's get to it. How'd you get into the bird hunting thing?
My wife bought me a bird dog out of the Atlanta paper in 1990. Yeah, you can cringe. Cringing is okay. I can see everybody go, oh, and now the time and effort we put into selecting a bird dog is exponentially more than my wife did. She literally went to the part that said bird dogs for sale and bought a Brittany. And the Brittany was, I named him Rocket. Randy's Red Hot Rocket was his name, and he was, I hunted him to the absolute limits of his genetic ability, which was not all that much, but I loved that dog, and he lived 12 and a half years, and I killed thousands of birds over him. And he basically taught me how to bird hunt. And my next dog was a setter, an English setter, female, and she was unbelievably good. And that's what really, really got me hooked. And so that's really how I got started. I started out with those dogs, a Brittany and a setter. I went to setters for a while, and finally I just decided I had to make up my mind what I wanted to do as far as a breed. And I settled on the Brittany for many reasons, but they're my breed of choice right now.
Well, give me a couple of those, because if we talk about why we chose our dog breed, we could be here until tomorrow. But yeah, there are a lot of Brittany lovers out there, and you can break them up into various subsets after that. But what are the things that really bubble to the top for you about that breed?
I really like their size. They're not a big dog. Although my Brittany's tend to be big, but when you pick them up at 7 weeks, you really don't know how big they're going to get. I've got a couple of them that are about 50 pounds, which I think is a little too big, but generally about 35, 40 pounds. I like it. I like the fact they don't have a long tail. A lot of people say that they really like to see that tail. And truthfully, a fine setter on point with that tail up in the air, with those feathers on there, that is beautiful. But I like the fact they don't have a tail. It's just one more thing that doesn't bleed when I get done hunting in the briars. So the size and the fact that they have the short tail, and I love their demeanor. I really like every one of them is my best friend, and I just love hunting those dogs. And there's a lot of things that I just can't you can't put a finger on. I do like the fact that when I field trial my dogs, they're real. I've got some really good field trial dogs, and I really like to put a whooping on the pointer guys. But other than that, that's just one thing. If you're gonna run Brittanys, you better have a thick skin, because there's going to be a lot of guys talk about bobtail brush pigs and fluff dogs and all the bad rep that Brittanys have had over the years, but all that's gone now. There's a lot of really good strains of Brittanys out there, a lot of really good breeding going on, and they are just as tough, and they get out just as far, and they do just as good a job as any bird dog out there. So, I would encourage somebody, if they're looking for a good indoor-outdoor dog, a dog that can stay inside with you and then hunt all day with you too. That'd be my bird dog of choice.
Well, and you talk about them all the time. You talk about them in the book, Endless October, which, by the way, where's the best place to get that book?
Amazon. They got it on Amazon, or, I'm selling myself probably as many as Amazon is. And if they want to just send me an email at endlessoctoberbook@gmail.com, we can set it up, and I can put a book in their hands in a week or so.
And, of course, you can listen to the podcast, and abirdhuntersthoughts.com is where you can get the blog. Of all the blog posts you've written over the years, Randy, is there one you think that, number one, that really really summarizes your feelings about bird hunting, that you want to share with us real quick, just the gist of it?
Well, there's one that I have in the book. It's chapter 7. And the reason I know that is because it was almost impossible for me to write. And it's still, I could barely, there's an Audible book out, believe it or not, also. I narrated it myself. And I could almost not narrate that chapter. There's a couple of long pauses in the Audible book where I am gathering myself back together. And it's a course about my best Brittany and his last hunt, which at the time I didn't know was going to be his last hunt. And it takes place in Montana. We're hunting sharptails and huns, and his name was Ace. And Ace and I had a wonderful last hunt together, and it's the story about him and I on that last hunt. But that pretty much summarizes the way I feel about my dogs, and Ace having been my best bird dog ever. I talk about him a lot, and so that would be pretty much the story, I think, would be, and that's in the blog, and it's also in the book. It's in the book as well.
Nice. Well, we all probably have a story somewhat like that, and what I found is that I'm like you. I have the same trouble trying to put it down on paper, if you will. But I think in a lot of ways it might be cathartic and therapeutic to actually do that. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Even if you don't have a blog, you might consider that the next time around if you have the chance. You have a whole bunch of trips every year over the years, and we've read about a lot of them. But if you had to nail it down, Randy Schultz, for the Upland Nation podcast listeners, is there a favorite state or a favorite species that you would love to do more of, and that you've really kind of put at the top of the list?
It's funny. Now there is, and I'll tell you that just a minute. But the problem is I don't do too much of it now, although I have to make a conscious decision to go back and hunt this bird. Right now, I do a lot of. The most time I spend in one spot is hunting blue quail now in New Mexico. I go there twice a year because the access is all public. Basically, if you can see it, you can hunt it. Most of that state is public land, and that's a wonderful way to hunt. And there's a lot of blue quail. A lot of people won't hunt them because they run, but they're a big, fast, tough bird, and they're challenging. and I just enjoy it so much. And, you know, right now I'm in sharptail and prairie chicken heaven up here in South Dakota, and also pheasant heaven. Most people know it as pheasant country, but I love the sharptails and chickens up here. So, but the bird that I really, really love is the ruffed grouse. And the ruffed grouse in the Great North Woods is really my idea of a perfect bird hunt. It takes a dog that knows what they're doing. It takes a gunner that knows what he's doing. And when the birds are there, it is just the most magical place in the world to be, is in those North Woods in October. It's just a wonderful place. Gives me chills thinking about it.
Me too. For the same reasons, I love hunting the trees. I'm not very good at it, and many trees have given their lives to protect a grouse.
I've shot a lot of them.
Yes, if you could only fit them in the game bag. But, you know, it's funny you should bring that up, because it is so darn different from where you currently reside and what you do most of the time. You've got trial dogs, you've got good hunting dogs, but they run big. And then do they run small in the woods?
That's a good question. And the answer is some dogs can adapt and some dogs can't. And I have one dog. In fact, my number one dog right now is 9 years old, believe it or not. His name is Cap. It's Captain, but I call him Cap. And he's the one that's inverted right next to me in the passenger seat right now. But he has a hard time adapting to the grouse woods. He will run big and run big and run big, and then all of a sudden he'll turn around and go, oh no, where am I and where is he? So he doesn't adapt so well. But I've got another dog that does great. And when I'm out on the prairie, she's out 300, 400, 500 yards sometimes. But when I get in the woods, she will stay within 40, 50 yards, which is perfect, you know, for the grouse woods.
So you can't.
And so
you can't train that. You're saying that for the most part, they got to figure it out for themselves.
You can encourage them to learn that, but essentially, I think it boils down to the dog. And like I said, some dogs never learn it. Some dogs can learn it, and some dogs just seem to innately have it. And if you can find a dog that innately figures that out, that setter I told you about, the second dog I ever owned, she was that way. She would be gone. I could see her on the tops of the ridge lines when we're hunting out in Montana. And then we would go right to grouse cover, and she would be perfect right in front of me. And this is before GPS days. This is back when we had beepers. Beeper collars were state of the art. And I'd just hear her beeper in front of me, and somehow she'd figure out that when I turned, she'd get back in front of me again. I don't know how she did it, but she was wonderful that way, and never had to say a word to her. So some figure it out, some don't, and some will. If you know, now with the electronic collars and so on, I never really use the electricity. I use the tone a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I use the tone a lot to turn them, to say, hey, I'm turning. I'll give them a tone. If they're out there far, I want to get them back in. I just give them a little bit of a tone, and then suddenly I see them coming back over the hill. So you got to know what you're doing to use that collar, but when you finally use it, you know, you can actually encourage them, and a lot of them will pick it up. But I've just found some dogs just innately figure it out.
Yeah. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, the host. That's Randy Schultz. I don't know how to describe you, Randy, except as author, blogger, podcaster, book narrator, avid hunter, and Brittany owner. You know, speaking of that sort of thing, though, what is it that really trips your trigger about going out with one dog, two dogs, five dogs to any place you're going? I mean, there's got to be some reason you keep doing it.
You know, that's a tough question, Scott. I wish you'd give me a little lead time on that one. You know, as soon as I get back home off a hunt, as I'm driving home off a hunt, I'm thinking about my next one, and I'm starting to get excited. Because I switch species, I switch terrain. But when I'm out there actually walking behind the dog, it's the whole litany of me trying to figure out where to put that dog. Is this the right habitat? Are there going to be birds here? And when we finally find what we're looking for, it's a team effort between that dog and me. And it's so gratifying to have a good day when I finally figured out where to stop the truck and drop the tailgate, which dog to put on the ground, which habitat, which direction to go, and which habitat to look for. And the more I know about my birds, you break open the crop, you look at what they're eating, you recognize the plant, you find that plant, and you're going to find more birds. Things like that I've picked up from hunting around the country. But I think it's that whole just system of using that man-dog interface, to harvest game. And I guess it's pretty basic. I mean, it's really about putting food on the table for your family. It's really not that nowadays, but that's what it harkens back to.
Yeah, deep in our genetic memory, that is probably the ultimate motivator. But you brought up a couple of other interesting things there, and I understand the emotional side of it. That's what really gets me worked up. But you also treat this in a way as an intellectual pursuit, doing all that detective work.
I do, and I learned that from a couple of guys I hunt with who are biologists. And one of them is a quail biologist. He's retired now, but he does contracting work. And so we would go out in, for example, New Mexico, and Terry would get out of the truck, and he'd walk out into the field, and he'd grab some plants, some seeds off of plants, and he'd rub it around in his hands, and he'd look at his hands, and he'd look at the ground, and he'd scuff around a little bit. And he'd come back and he'd say, "This is the spot," or "This is not the spot." And I kind of looked at him. I said, "Terry, what's going on? What are you doing?" And he said, "I know what these quail eat, and I know what they're." And for example, I'm out there grabbing that ragweed, and none of this ragweed has seeds on it. For some reason, the ragweed came up, and it was a poor year. So we're not going to hunt ragweed this year. We're going to go hunt the shin oak and the sunflowers and the daisies and all that stuff, and that's where we're going to find birds. And so that got me thinking about, I need to learn my birds, and I need to know what they eat. I need to know what their timeline is. When do they go into cover? When do they loaf during the day? When do they feed? What do they eat? What are their enemies? What are they looking out for? Mostly hawks. But the more I can learn about what I'm hunting, the better chance it gives me to be successful in the field.
Boy, I'll tell you, the hair's standing up on the back of my neck just thinking about it, especially in New Mexico, one of my favorite places for the very same reasons as you. We'll talk a little bit about scalies, and we'll talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, including tips on travel with 1, 2, or 5 dogs, and maybe a horse or 2 and 15 kids and all that other stuff. So we got all that coming up, as well as a handle it tip for everybody who's looking for more advice, insights into dog performance. That's all coming up in just a moment or two. So Randy, take a sip of coffee, hold on for a moment, breathe deep, and we'll be back at you after these quick announcements. And that first one is from my good friends at Dakota283.com. They make crates, kennels, and other accessories, including gun storage, all modular, if you will. These guys have figured it out. If you're headed to Pheasant Fest or something like that, you'll see them there. Stop in and say hello to Greg and the crew at Dakota283.com. New lower prices on everything. So if you were doing the math before, do it again. Go to Dakota283.com and figure out if now is the time to get your dog its forever kennel. And ESPAmerica.com. You've seen the guys at the sports shows sitting there patiently while somebody shoves some of this molten stuff into their ear and then fits it out. And then from that mold comes a great hearing protection device. Well, you don't need to go to the sports shows, find the parking and all of that, because you can do it right in your own hometown. And Jack Homa at espamerica.com will reimburse you for the cost of having that custom fitting. While you're there, you might want to take a look at your hearing test results as well. As I've pointed out in the past, my audiologist reminds me that hearing your wife and listening to her are two different things. So just remember that the next time you are out in the field and you're wondering why you can't hear that dog's collar tags. Take a look at espamerica.com. And with that, it is time to talk about our dogs and handling them better in the field. Randy Schultz, the author of the book Endless October, is with me as well. So Randy, feel free to chime in whenever you like on this subject. But here's one that I've found fascinating, and I've made a study of it ever since. Part of it due to the fact that I'm a music major and don't have much else to think about because I hardly ever get to shoot. But I would call my dog back from a distance, and if I could see him, half the time he would run the opposite direction. And I don't like to think he was disobeying. I like to think, well, it finally was driven home to me once. We were up against a big rock wall in some chucker country, and I blew my whistle. And I heard the echo of that whistle off of that big rock wall. And it's no wonder my dog ran for the rock wall instead of for me. You ever run into that sort of thing out there, Randy?
That's interesting you bring that up, because I did. And in the Snake River Canyon, I was hunting out there with some friends in Idaho. I was hunting valley quail alongside the river. And my best dog at the time, Ace, it was right at sunset. And we did a short cast, found some birds, we're heading back. I gave him a couple toots on the whistle, and I didn't even bother watching where he was. He does what he's told. So we were talking, heading back to the truck, and a couple hundred yards later, no dog. So this was when I had the GPS. It was kind of new. It was nice to have, and I saw him out there about a mile away. Well, he didn't start that far out, so I kind of watched him on the GPS, gave him another toot on the whistle. He stopped, did a couple of circles, and started going away. And I could not for the life of me figure out what was going wrong. And the guy with me, Bob Welsh, he looked at me and he said, "You know what? The sound is coming off those hills, off those canyon sides, coming down into the river." And he's confused about where he is. Well, it's getting darker and colder and darker and colder. And finally, he was basically running in circles out there. He was lost. And I could see him, and now he's about 2 miles away. So finally, Bob and I said, we got to go get him. And I grabbed his shotgun because I had dropped mine off the truck, put a bunch of shells in my pocket, and I was afraid of the coyotes and somebody getting them. And Bob was a lot more level-headed about it. But I headed out, so I'm going to go get my dog. And I finally shot shotgun a couple of times and found a trail alongside the river, and finally got it to where he could figure out where I was, and we finally got back together. But I was very thankful. I was really worried about losing my dog, and that's exactly what was going on. The sound was actually echoing off the walls, and he did not know where I was.
They can't do the exercise that we can do and suss all that out. And I'm glad you got him back, and I'm glad you got to hunt with Bob. By the way, he's a great guy. I'll tell you some stories off mic about him that love what he does and all of that. But here are some things that I found will help that. The first is when I figure that out, if I want a dog to run in direction A toward me, I will turn 180 degrees and blow in direction B. And he hears that, and even if he hears the echo, he's running towards either the original sound or the echo, and they're both in my direction because I've turned all the way around. Another way I've done that is to just adjust the volume on my whistle so it's not strong enough. Same with yelling and screaming and all of that. If you're going to call your dog, you can just keep it a little bit softer, and maybe they'll hear it without the echo. Those things are things that you learned the hard way. I've learned the hard way. They're not disobedience. It's just all about acoustics and echoes and all that stuff that nobody thinks about when they're hunting. So glad you had a happy ending on your story.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about travel and dogs. And I can't think of anybody who does more than you based on what we've learned already. Can you think of some tips that the rest of us? I'm headed out Tuesday. Give me a hint or two about piling dogs into the truck and heading a long distance that maybe we hadn't thought about before.
One thing I've noticed, I've talked to guys that travel, and and this influences not only the dog but me, the driver or whoever the hunter, and that is that I take many breaks. Many breaks. I drove 1,000 miles yesterday from Atlanta to Omaha, and I broke every 2 hours. I got out and walked all 5 of my dogs. And during that time, of course, I was walking myself, and that got the blood flowing through my legs and back up into my body, because science tells us after 90 minutes, blood starts pooling in your legs if you're sitting still. Whether you're behind a desk or driving a car, makes no difference. So after 90 minutes, that blood's pooling in the lower body, and it doesn't do you any good or your veins any good down there. And I'm 69, and I've got some vein problem. I'm on drugs, blood thinners, because of all the time I spent sitting in cockpits, throughout my life. And these long drives are very bad for you, and they're not good for the dogs. They will sit back there and, they're curled up in their crates or the back seat or wherever you have them, and they need to get out and exercise as well. So my first thing to say is, don't think that just because a dog's not whining that he doesn't need to get out and move. So take breaks, take as many as you can. Spend that extra 10 minutes, and when your dog gets to where they're going, they're going to feel a lot better.
Do you find particular locations? I kind of have a short list of types of places I punch into my GPS when I need to pull over and deal with the dogs and myself. I like fairgrounds. I like schools on the weekends. Have you found any other places where it's a little quiet, a little bit off the beaten path that we might want to look for on our next road trip?
I usually use, and you're going to cringe, I usually use rest areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little concerned about that because of the fact that when you use a pet area at a rest area, you don't know what kind of diseases are there. So you got your dog over there, and these dogs are, there's all kinds of dog poop and so on there. So I'll get out away from all that as far as I can. But I do have a friend, Robert Seiler, that I hunt with a lot. He's a biologist, and he will use schools. He will use, believe it or not, he'll use churches.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
except on Sundays, and he's got places marked all over the country, and he does that a lot. But yeah, as for me, I find it way more convenient just to pull into rest areas, and I do have several marked that I like a lot better than others. But my main concern about using a rest area, and a lot of people use them, is, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, I will see guys let their dogs out, not on a lead, and kind of let them move around because their dogs are so obedient.
Mm-hmm.
That is scary to me. And I shake my head and I say, please don't do that. Because your dog may be obedient until that rabbit runs by or the squirrel runs by, or, oh no, my dog won't chase him. Well, I'd hate to be the one guy to make that mistake. And that is scary to me. So my dogs, when they come out of that crate, they're on a lead immediately. And I walk them on a flexi lead so they get a little, they can get out in front of me a little bit. But that's sort of my tips as far as letting them out. And I do use rest areas, but I really would like to do it the way you do it. But maybe that's something I can improve on.
Yes, you can, but I understand, and it's all about being responsible no matter where you're pulled over. You could do that in a supermarket parking lot as long as you're careful about it. And we've all had to have that happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
So you're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, the host. That's Randy Schultz, author of the book Endless October, author of the blog A Bird Hunter's Thoughts, and the podcast Turn 'Em Loose. Geez, I'm gonna have to make a longer podcast just to fit in all your credits, man. One more thing about this travel, and I'm throwing things in every day now as I get ready for my next road trip. Do you bring anything along that most of us haven't thought of yet? Kind of a forehead slapping item or two that you find quite useful?
Well, I've got everything kind of stored in its own little spot. My wife thinks I just throw them in the truck, but I've got everything set in its own spot. But I do like those flexi leads, and I've got them all over the truck. But I know exactly where they are. I can reach them after dark. That's important. You got to be able to get someplace when it's just pitch black. You got to be able to reach in and find it. But I do use one of those watering buckets, that you fill up, and then when you tip it up, the water won't tip out.
Oh yeah.
And then you flip it over, and I got mine that I think it's like they used to call them rough tough kennels, but I've got one of those, and I use that a lot. In fact, I've lost about 4 of those because I'll put them out and water the dogs and forget them and drive off, but I always get another one because they are so convenient. The other thing is I'll put 3 or 4 gallons of fresh water back there because I do not like my dogs. They will drink out of mud puddles. They'll drink out of wherever they can when they get really thirsty. But I try to give them pure water as much as I can, and I'll carry that pure water in the back of my vest as well. So those are really the 2 items I use every day when I'm hunting and every day when I'm traveling. Especially that water bucket. I really like that because you can grab it. It's got a handle on it. They all do. I'm not pushing a certain brand, but you can grab that thing out and you got 2 gallons of fresh water right there for the dogs. You're not pouring it into a bowl and then having to dump it out and that. But I really like that item too.
And you mentioned after dark, and 2 of the things that I've really come to appreciate, and I have friends to thank for both of them. Number one is enough lights in the back of your truck.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And
yeah.
then in the center console of my truck is a headlamp. So rather than occupy one of your few hands with a flashlight, a headlamp saves a lot of headaches and frees you up, whether it's to change a tire or doctor a dog or anything else. So
It's funny. I've got 3 headlamps right under my left hand. I carry them in the door here in my truck, and I do have lights in the back of my truck, those LED lights, and it lights it up like daytime at night. And that was one of the better things I did. So great minds think alike. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and then I get to follow along. I'm not a great mind, but I would appreciate your great mindedness on just a few training observations. You do some field trials. You do a lot of hunting. Your dogs seem to be pretty darn good at both. Anything in particular that you do that maybe we don't do yet that you can help us with in the training side?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I've learned through hard-won experience, and that is that when I am hunting, I insist on my dogs doing what they do in a field trial and doing it correctly. For example, backing. When I get out there, if my dogs get excited and I got a dog on point and I got another dog that starts creeping in, I stop. I don't care what the bird does at that point. I will walk over and pick that dog up and put him back and sit him down, tell him, whoa, you're going to back. And I make them do it. And the other thing is retrieving. You know how we all get excited and they're bringing that bird back, and in a field trial, they put it in your hand and everything's hunky-dory. But when you get out hunting, they'll bring that bird back and just spit it out at your feet and head back out. And you'll think, well, we're hunting now. That's okay. But it's not, because that dog will carry that over into a field trial, and the next thing you know, he'll run right up to you in a field trial and spit it out. So I insist on my dogs having manners in the field as well as while I'm doing the field trial thing, and that makes for an easy transition. Now, even if you don't do field trials, I think if you allow your dog to get lazy and sloppy, that it'll show up in his performance in the field as well. And that's just my subjective opinion.
Well, I learned that the hard way last weekend, so we're back to square one on the force fetching thing. But we're making progress, and it will, and just for everybody else out there, and you'll probably read about this in my blog real soon. What has really changed the dynamic on the fetching side of things in the field is if there's another dog in the picture. Your dog becomes possessive to the point where he'll eat it instead of letting the other dog have it, or the risk of it. And I just found out again that's true of another human being as well. We were on opposite sides of a wire fence, and I said, well, you just go get it from him. And my dog would not give that bird to my hunting partner that day, and in fact ran off, and he was ready to parse it out into little pieces unless I caught up with him fast enough. So the dynamic of other beings in the field has some effect on that as well. But like I said, I'm learning every day.
That's true. I'm laughing because I've seen all that.
Oh, yeah, yes. Thank you. So you're laughing with me, not
I'm
at me.
with you. Absolutely.
I got to touch on blue quail, cotton tops, scalies, whatever you want to call them, because like you, I'm intrigued by those birds, and also frustrated because, like you said, they don't look like it, but they do have track shoes on. Tell me, have you figured out how to handle that? I mean, we both run pointing breeds, yet these birds are probably ideally designed for an aggressive Springer Spaniel.
Oh yeah, or even a Labrador.
Mm-hmm.
Even a Labrador, yeah. And I know guys that hunt them with labs and do as well as I do with my pointing dogs. But I have found and actually Robert Seilers is the one that came up with this technique, and now I'm using it. So what he does is, a lot of those birds will flush off the road. You'll be driving to a spot, and your idea is you're going to stop and instrument your dog and put them out and go find a covey. And then that's the way it works usually. But a lot of times you'll be driving those caliche roads out there in New Mexico, and the birds will come out to the road to get gravel like birds do, and they'll just roost in a mesquite thicket right on the road. And you'll be driving down the road, and suddenly a 30-bird covey will flush off the road. Well, now you're in a quandary because they know you're there. They're looking at you, and they'll run away from you all day long. If you stop your truck and jump out after them, now you're in a track race. I mean, those dogs can run as fast as your dog can move, and basically what you're teaching your dog to do is flush.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem. It's a real problem. Unless you can get that dog that covey to flush again, and then you'll be hunting singles, and that'll be a lot of fun. But what Robert decided to do one day is he would watch him flush off the road. He'd stop, and he would smoke a cigarette or whatever he does, and he'd wait 15 minutes, and he'd watch where they land. You'd be able to see them land. They wouldn't go 100 yards, and they'll set down in another mesquite bush. And if they're not pressured, they'll stay there. And so he knows where they are, and he'll sit there for 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, and then he'll take his dog and he'll make a loop and come in from the other direction around to that bush, and they'll be there. And it works. It works probably, more than half the time, which is a huge success, when you think about the overall numbers. But so let them get settled before you go chasing after them, and that is very hard to teach. It's extremely hard to teach somebody that really wants to get out there and go after birds, and it keeps your dog from chasing those guys. It puts them in a position where they can point the covey again, and since you know where they are, it makes it a lot easier on everybody. So that's one thing I've learned about blue quail, and one technique that I think would work for blue quail. Another technique is if you have a Labrador or a Springer or a Jack Russell Terrier or anything but a pointing dog, have them right up in the front seat with you. And when that covey flushes, turn them out. Let them go. Let that dog go out there and have a blast bumping those birds up. And by the time he gets back, he won't catch them. By the time he gets back, those birds are scattered everywhere, and they will hold tight. And you just take your pointing dog, go out there and shoot singles and have a good time.
You know, that is, some folks, some old timers in particular, that is their chucker hunting tactic as well.
Really?
It's been a long time since I've heard that from anybody, but I remember long ago hearing that from a lot of the old timers. Anymore, I'm grateful to find a covey, a single, a double, or anything else out there. But they do break up well, and then they will quite often cooperate a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to leave our audience with one more bit of hard-won advice from a guy who's been there and done that, whether it's about dogs, birds, travel, or anything else, what would you tell us, Randy?
Well, the one thing I'm trying to learn and that I get out of practically every trip is I've got to stop and sit down, see where I am, and thank God. And that's just about it. Thank him for letting me be where I am and able to do what I do. Because you know what? We are just about the only country on the face of this earth that we can do this.
You're absolutely right. You know, we do not stop and smell the roses, whatever they are, near as much. And on that note, I'm going to turn you loose to travel on because you are a man on a mission. I will probably honk at you as you're going west while I'm going east next week. In the meanwhile, yeah, thank you. If you want to learn more about Randy Schultz and all of his output, from the blog to the podcast to the book Endless October, Randy, is there one place we should go to get all that information?
My blog. It's birdhuntersthoughts.com, and on the right hand, on the home page, and the main page there, on the right hand side, I've got a list of a couple of sponsors. One of my sponsors is espamerica.com. I thought that was interesting, and I do use them every chance I get because I'm deaf in my right ear.
What?
But go ahead.
No, I was having fun with you. I'm the same way.
Yeah, I shoot left-handed, so my right ear is about shot. But anyway, on my blog on the right-hand side, and there's a link there to my book. There's a link there to my podcast and my sponsors if you want to go through those. And so really that's sort of a home page of birdhuntersthoughts.com. And Scott, I've had a blast talking with you as always. And I really do hope one day we can go in to get in the field together. We've been hit or miss for many years now. So I think one of these days we're just going to have to make a point to do it.
I agree, and it's coming closer every year. Enjoyed our discussion as well. Everybody else out there listening to the Upland Nation podcast, now you know where to find out more about Randy and all his work. You guys stick around. I'm turning him loose, but we've got This Land Is Your Land, and we're talking about, hey, desert quail in that feature, and then, of course, the Upland Trivia question and a prize. It's all coming up after I turn you loose. Randy, drive safe. See you in the field. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Goodbye.
Right after this message from Dogtra. Yeah, they are the guys who've come up with what I think is probably the smartest design move I've seen in a long time, and that is their T&B Dual beeper, tone, vibrate, stimulation collar. This thing has it all, and the joy of the dual version of this is, number one, you can control two dogs with one handheld remote that has two sets of buttons, so you're not toggling back and forth. You got a green one and an orange one, and both sets of buttons are right there. You can operate it with one hand while you use the other hand for anything from holding a check cord to throwing a bird to grabbing a dog to you name it. And only for Upland Nation podcast listeners can you get 10% off your purchase of the T&B Dual or any other Dogtra product over $200 just by using the coupon code SLUN10. SLUN10 gets you 10% off at dogtra.com on anything over $200. And by the way, shipping is free on any purchase over $200 as well. Well, it was fun talking desert quail with Randy Schultz, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more. We're going one state west of New Mexico over to Arizona, one of my favorite states. I won't bore you with the details there, but yeah, believe it or not, there are national forests in Arizona, and they are actually forests. Yeah, you go to the northern end of the state and the southern end of the state, and there's mountains and trees and some quail. Mearns quail in particular in the Coronado National Forest in the steeper hills. You might have seen a few pictures over the years in some of the magazine articles. Mearns are kind of an interesting critter in that they hang in the pinyon pines and the oaks in the Coronado National Forest. And they're in the hilly sections, so what you want to do is look for they're scratchings in the ground. They dig for tubers. They're not seed eaters per se. They'll probably eat a few of those, but mainly they're digging for tubers, you know, the little tiny versions of potatoes out there. Find some of that, put your dog on the ground, make sure he's got boots on because there's still lots of things that will scratch, bite, and sting him. Be careful out there. Enjoy the Coronado National Forest, and that is this land is your land. Enjoy your public access no matter where you're going. All right, hold tight because we got the Upland Trivia question coming up real soon. But in the meanwhile, let's introduce my newest sponsor, tagsafari.com, tagsafari.com. I know it sounds like one of those hoity-toity apparel companies, and I got to tell you, they are all of that. But the reason I love their clothing is, first off, 15% off anything just by being an Upland Nation listener. Tag Linden15 is the discount code. TAG Linden15 will get you a 15% discount, free shipping over $150. One of the neat things about Tag Safari is they started in Africa. They employ lots of Africans. They grow their own cotton out there. It's a very high quality cotton, and it is hands loomed and then hand washed so that it gets that nice broken in feel without being abused like, well, the jeans I'm wearing right now. Also double stitched, lots of dependable service, generous sizing for freedom of movement, and long tails that stay tucked in. If you want to learn more, go to tagsafari.com. And then just a quick reminder, free shipping over $200 for anything from dogtra.com, including their TNB Dual, one of my favorite new products on the horizon these days. It's now available, and they are shipping every day. All right, welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast. It's time for our Upland Nation trivia quiz. This week's prize, very popular this time of year, my dog energy bars by Crunch Pemmican. 2-pack of those will go off to you just in time for the meat of the season. And, you know, I can't tell you how many people have sworn by these over the years. So think carefully about your answer. Send it to scottlindonoutdoors@gmail.com, and you might be taking a 2-pack of dog energy bars on your next hunt. All right, put yourself somewhere in the West. Think about chukar partridge. They were introduced in the 40s, first in Nevada. But where did we bring them from to introduce them out here? There's any number of right answers. If you know where chukar partridge came from when they were introduced in the United States, send your answer to scottlindonoutdoors@gmail.com. Good luck, and thank you for listening, for telling your friends, for following us on the Upland Nation Facebook page. If you'd like more information, please subscribe to the podcast at uplandnation.com. See you in the field.